Welcome all junior employees, assistant to the detectives, and assistant detectives to the overviews of the Anti Strangling Task Force. This is the overview for the WUPHF Emergency Response Team. Now, as I've mentioned in a few of my previous overviews, this isn't an area that I've spent a significant amount of time on. So in order to actually do this overview, I ended up sort of scanning some of the extracurricular material, just sort of, dipping my toes in the surface to see what I could find. Admittedly, I had spent time on TripAdvisor in the past, and I had also spent quite a bit of time analyzing Angela and Dwight's parenting agreement. So those are two things where, I will be touching on those in a bit more detail. But in this overview, I primarily want to give a few examples of what this particular team is looking for, the implications of those findings, and really demonstrating that there is quite a rich amount of information in this extracurricular material. Now, a lot of the extracurricular material has since disappeared from NBC's website, right? So a lot of this information is available through the web archives, and I'm going to at some point provide links to that. And I'm sure people can probably find that themselves. I am going to discuss at the end part of the assignment of this particular team, which is going to be to petition, both NBC and TripAdvisor to reinstate the unadulterated versions of the information that was initially provided. But I'll touch on that a little bit later. To start the sort of analysis off, we're going to look at Angela and Dwight's parenting agreement. That's available in the web archives, and there's a lot going on in this agreement. For this little section, I'm just going to touch on a few points that I think are worthy of mention. That's not to say the rest of it isn't. It's, I guess these are just the things that sort of stand out to me as worthy of attention. So, as I've already sort of referenced in a previous video, clause 2.5. Father and mother shall have joint custody of descendants of replicants from this union. Now, I mentioned in the Extraterrestrial Time Traveling Task Force episode, and also in my Season 1 overview, that there's this concept of replicants. And I strongly believe that's linked to the photocopiers and to time travel, right? But there's a specific clause dedicated to this in their agreement. So definitely something that we need to be mindful of, and definitely something that needs further investigation. Clause 3.4. Should a child have mutant powers, parties agree to send the child to a school that aids the child in harnessing his talent for good. Now, this links into both The Crow, and I mentioned this in the Great Scott Film Forensics overview, that there's significant parallels between The Crow and Dwight Schrute. And there's, good reasons to believe that Dwight perhaps does have some sort of supernatural power. He certainly has access to various time-traveling capability. We also know that Dwight went to a school of a similar nature. We find that out in the last season when they're looking for the new salesman to join the team, and we have a lot of Dwight's friends come in, and some of them talk about their experiences in this school and the various abilities that they have.
When I was young, I spent several years at a private school where I was told I would be taught to harness my mutant abilities. Turned out, it was a con man copying Charles Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters from the X-Men comic books.
So again, a point worthy of further investigation, and certainly has a central role, I would think, in this mystery. Clause 3.7. Should the child be born a devil's son, a separate agreement shall be made. So again, this links into The Crow. I already mentioned that in The Crow, Eric Draven is assumed to sort of have been resurrected by God. I mean, there are biblical references in the movie, and there's a suggestion that Eric Draven has been brought back from the dead to enact temporal judgment for the people that committed the grossly evil and immoral acts on himself and his fiancée. I did mention that I believe Dwight may be the inverse of that. So as opposed to being resurrected from the dead by God, perhaps Dwight has a satanic link. And there's a strong occultic theme in this mystery. So, this clause, again, raises a lot of questions and in some ways also fills in a few gaps if we think about sort of the parallels between The Crow and the roles that movies have in this mystery. Clause 4.1. The child will be breastfed for 6 months, then weaned onto a nutrient-rich winter vegetable mash provided by the father. I mentioned that breastfeeding is a linchpin of Dwight's trauma, and I haven't completely detailed yet, but when we get to those episodes, we'll come to the realization that breastfeeding has a very central role. Not only that, I have already mentioned that, boobs, breasts, breastfeeding are a repeated motif in the show. So again, we have another reference to breastfeeding in this agreement and something that we need to focus on. Clause 4.2. Meat will be introduced into the diet at 9 months and will be included in every meal. Now, this is one that I haven't really spoken about at all yet, but we know that Dwight is very much a carnivore, and we're going to find out through this investigation that has its own implications. Right? Probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but it's another example of something put in the agreement that definitely links back to other elements of the mystery. Clause 6.2. The father will train child to sleep with its eyes open. This again links into Dwight's childhood trauma, and again I'm sort of jumping ahead a little bit here, but as we get into the swing of this investigation, we'll realize that the traumatic life that Dwight had as a child probably made him teach himself to sleep with his eyes open, and he wants to pass that on to his child. So again, this is another window into the traumatic childhood that Dwight had, and it will be something that we refer to once we get to those episodes. Now finally, what's also interesting about this document is what we cannot see. There are numerous parts of the document are redacted, and look, this is very challenging, but if the WUPHF emergency response team could shed any light on what the redacted elements could be, perhaps throughout the show we'll be able to work out what these redacted parts are. I mean, the signatures are redacted, entire clauses are redacted, sometimes parts of various clauses are redacted, right? But the redacting in itself is another clue, and if we can unearth any sort of further information around that, I think that'd be of great interest to the task force. Now, in NBC's additional content, we didn't just have this document. There is a vast amount of information, and another one that I want to touch on in this overview is the diabolical blog. If you remember, when Dwight becomes co-manager, Dwight leaves his diabolical plan in the photocopier, and then Ryan finds it, right? And the whole diabolical plan relates to, displacing Jim as a co-manager and, taking him down, putting it simply, right? So the first thing I want to mention around here, again, we have another reference to the devil. I mean, Diablo is the devil in Spanish and in Latin, I think, as well. And so we have another link again to the occult here, and again to the dark side of morality. But there are two things in this blog that I want to bring your attention to. Again, that's not disregarding the rest. There's just two that sort of stood out to me that I think are worthy of mention. In one of the blogs, he talks about tax time and about writing off expenses. And in the second dot point, he talks about paper. And he says he's going to expense several thousand boxes of paper. It's a pretty good deal, actually. I buy the paper from myself at cost plus 30%, then write off 40% of my costs. I'm still operating at a pretty significant loss, especially after the expense of building a new paper silo, which I'll also write off to store the paper I bought from myself. But it helped me destroy Jim in the branch-wide sales contest, and I won the most rocking pen set ever, which I then sold on eBay for a tidy profit of $24. Now, I mentioned in my season 1 overview, in the intro sequence, we have a shot of Jim where he's talking to that client who's responsible for 25% of his commission. And in that little segment, I talk about how Dwight isn't really the number one sales guy. He mentions in a deleted scene that he buys paper from himself, right? He's fudging the numbers. I believe he's even, adding an additional month's worth of revenue to his sales figures. And I hadn't actually seen this part of the Diabolical blog until I did this overview. So a lot of my assumptions are actually confirmed in this blog. I mean, Dwight basically tells us outright he buys paper from himself so that he can outsell Jim. And this is a far cry from the belief that a lot of fans have, and even all of us initially are led to believe that Dwight's the number one sales guy. And he's not. He's buying paper from himself. This also links into the colorblind financial fraud regulator, because thinking about the percentages of, he buys it at cost at 30%, then he writes it off. He writes 40% of those costs off, and how all that works just gives me a headache, right? So the financial fraud regulator will have to look at this and sort of focus in on how those write-offs are sort of getting through, or how he's remaining undetected, because he finishes off the blog like this. Who wouldn't be impressed with a man who combines the killing prowess of an orc with the tax savvy of a Fortune 500 comptroller? This is the second mention that we have of a comptroller. If you remember, Angela is meeting the comptroller's wife with the senator. And there's a little joke about the comptroller. So we have, again, numerous mentions of a comptroller, but even that mention about the killing prowess of an orc. Again, we have another link to the Scranton Strangler and to murder and to killing. So I guess in this case, the WUPHF emergency response team would have to disseminate this information to the colorblind financial fraud regulator, and it'd be probably something that both teams work on and look at. But excellent examples in this blog where we either have our suspicions confirmed, and as I said, Dwight basically tells us outright he buys paper to beat Jim in the sales contest. That tells us a lot. Another part of the Diabolical blog I want to sort of reference here is the surveillance blog post. And I'm only going to briefly touch on this, but Dwight says, just last week I used 4 of my security cameras, 3 hidden mics, and a heat sensor to discover where Mose was hiding my car keys. He wants us to spend more time together. We have a couple of episodes dedicated to surveillance. We have the email surveillance episode where Michael starts to spy on everybody's email. Then in the Danny Cordray episode, we have that little sting where they're filming Danny Cordray selling to Meredith so they can work out what his sales technique is. Not only that, we also have the pen, the clicky pen and the mallet. There's plenty of references to surveillance. What most stands out to me here is the heat sensor. We already know that Dwight has surveillance around the office, and that's something that we need to be mindful of throughout the whole investigation, that Dwight likely has eyes and ears everywhere. But the heat sensor, to me, I don't know what it is about it, but we're introduced to a new surveillance method in this post, and it makes me wonder, does the heat sensor perhaps play an additional role somewhere else in the mystery? I mean, a heat sensor would be used in very specific circumstances, right? So it's something that we need to remember, because that might fill in a gap in the future somewhere. But again, reinforces the motif and repetition of surveillance and Dwight's surveillance capabilities. From the beginning of this investigation, we simply must assume that Dwight has access to, eavesdropping information throughout the office, not only the Scranton office, but throughout the organization, right? And that'll make more sense as we get into this investigation, but it's something really important that we need to be conscious of. Another extra material NBC released was Dwight Schrute PI. And if we remember that Michael hires Dwight as a PI to investigate Ms. Boobshirt to see whether she's cheating on him, and it turns out Dwight also works as a private investigator. On this webpage, there's a link to his solved cases, and there's 2 solved cases that I want to draw your attention to. The first is the copy machine jammer, and the post goes like this. Case number 3, the copy machine jammer. Someone in the office was putting documents held together by a paperclip into the feed, causing it jam. I followed the evidence to conclude that it was accountant Oscar Martinez for 3 reasons. 1, he works right beside the copy machine, easy access. 2. Oscar is known to use paper clips, confirmed by 10 eyewitnesses. 3. There were photos of Taylor Lautner and Robert Pattinson and a love letter made out to Ryan found in the jam. Oscar is a homosexual, and I've often heard the Twilight films described as gay. Plus, I could see why a homosexual male would be attracted to Ryan. I have notified HR of Oscar's misconduct. So the first thing, guys, I think it's pretty obvious it's not Oscar. I mean, it sounds like Kelly. She's in love with Ryan. She loves the Twilight movies, and it just sounds like it has to be Kelly. Now, the implications of that I'm unsure of, but I've mentioned how the photocopier has significance. My suspicion thus far is that it has a link to time travel. It's either a time traveling related device, it's the device responsible for spitting out replicants. I mean, this is a bit of a far out theory, but could it be whatever you photocopy becomes a reality? I don't know. But again, we're referencing the copier. And I've mentioned already in the season 1 overview how the copier is a strong motif in the show, and I'm strongly suspicious that its primary meaning is symbolic. How Kelly comes into it, and the fact that she jams the photocopier. If the photocopier is symbolic, then what does jamming the photocopier mean? Right, I don't have the answers for all of this, guys, but again, it's an example where this extracurricular material raises questions, and it's why we have a dedicated team that focuses on this material, because A, there is a lot of it, but B, it also provides us not only with questions, but, in tandem, it provides us with some answers or possible direction, right? So this one stood out to me again because I'm conscious of the photocopier. This one just stands out like a sore thumb, and what the implications of Kelly, messing the photocopier up, I'm not exactly sure, but my gut instinct tells me there's something more to this story. The next solved mystery is case number 5, B&B bashing. And Dwight writes, someone was writing tasteless and insolent comments on the Schrute Farm's TripAdvisor page. Things like, there are no beds, only hay piles and horse blankets. The beet wine gave me violent food poisoning. Mose stole my toothbrush. These are false claims and also very confusing, as no guest has ever left Schrute Farms dissatisfied. I have each patron fill out customer review cards before they leave, and although they're anonymous, I went back through them to try and find any clues. There was one particular review that wasn't terrible, but had an annoyingly sardonic tone. I studied the handwriting, did some fingerprinting, and was able to trace it back to my co-worker Jim. Clearly he was the idiot who posted the fake internet reviews. Justice has been served, and he's been banned from TripAdvisor for life. Now, one line that stands out to me is, no guest has ever left Schrute Farms dissatisfied. Now, on the point of satisfaction, could this be some sort of a sexual service that Dwight is offering at Schrute Farms? Something for the Bob Kazamakis Sex Investigation Squad to look into. But if we remove the dissatisfied, what we get is no guest has ever left Schrute Farms. Why Dwight operates the B&B, I think there are nefarious reasons for it, right? Rather than him hunting for victims, they could bring victims to him. Right, and if nobody ever leaves Schrute Farms, well, that'd make sense why nobody leaves. But Jim and Pam would be an example of a couple that has arrived and left. So something curious there. But in saying that, I want to jump from the PI site to TripAdvisor. Now, unfortunately, guys, at some point this year, 2022, prior to April, TripAdvisor changed their reviews website. I was fortunate enough a few years ago to actually scroll through all the reviews, and I focused on the ones that were responded to by the owners of Schrute Farms. And just on that point, it would change. I mean, there was at least one post I remember that was 100% responded to by Dwight. Some other posts were responded to by unknown people or other people on Schrute Farms, right? And before I tell you what I remember, I want to quickly mention that and I mentioned this at the beginning of this overview, part of what we need to do, guys, is, and this is for the whole task force, We need to petition NBC and TripAdvisor to reinstate all the original material in its unadulterated state so we don't have to go through the web archives. I tried to search the web archives for the reviews of Schrute Farms prior to the change, and I'm unable to access certain pages and, certain star ratings. I mean, it's not a complete picture, and it's really hard to find those posts. And the post I want to share with you today, which unfortunately I can't show you, but I can only share it with you from my memory. There was one customer review which accused Angela and Mose running out of a bedroom naked, and I'm not sure if Dwight was chasing them or what it was, but the implication was that Angela and Mose were having an affair, right? And that comment was responded to by the owners of Schrute Farms, as I remember it, quite angrily. Again, I can't show it to you, and this is why we need to petition TripAdvisor to bring it back, but if I just share with you the implications of that, I mean, who did Angela really fall pregnant to? Could it have been Mose? Right? And you may be like, it's a ridiculous claim. As we progress through this investigation, we'll understand more about Angela and how Angela's mind works. And once you understand, what Angela is primarily attracted to, because that links into her childhood trauma, right? The possibility that she had an affair with Mose actually makes sense. And again, I'm jumping ahead here, but that would also link into the theme of infidelity and love triangles that we have in this show, right? Love triangles are a significant part of the mystery. We can continue to have throughout the show new love triangles with new unique characters, or with the same characters with a different person brought in, right? So that post was significant. It was a clue. The reviews seem to still be there, but the only owner responses on the new TripAdvisor page seem to be from the last 2 years. We need the ones from before, which ultimately then brings me to the conclusion of this overview. Your assignment is as follows. The first is to petition TripAdvisor and NBC, fill their inboxes and customer complaint stuff with bringing back this material. We need this to be easily accessible. If worse comes to worse, we'll use the web archives, right? But we need to harness a little bit of task force might and power in getting this information so it's easily accessible. I mean, one example of something that cannot be accessed on the web archives from what I can see is Dwight Schrute's inbox. That was a bonus material. Right, and I would love to see what is in his inbox, but there only seems to be one post available through the web archives. We need to see the rest. Other assignments include all the other material that I have not mentioned, guys. We have Creed Thoughts, Dunder Mifflin newsletters, Dunder Mifflin Finity is on there, Saber website is on there, Pam and Jim's wedding material, Angela and Andy's wedding material. There is heaps of stuff on there. There is a bounty of stuff on there to sift through. But it's not just the extra material. As I said, TripAdvisor, we need to get that info back on TripAdvisor. Brian Bortgartner has his own podcast. I don't think there are as many episodes as The Office Ladies, but that also falls into this category. Then we also have sort of cameos, like at the Emmys. Some of you guys might have already watched this. We had like a crossover between The Office and Breaking Bad and various other TV shows. And there are clues that are given to us there, because ultimately the actors are still in character. So it's something that has to be looked at. And I can tell you that entire clip at the Emmys is loaded with very interesting information. So guys, in short, the WUPHF Emergency Response Team, their focus is not the show. Part of the challenge is going to be to link back their findings into the show. So obviously the WUPHF Emergency Response Team is going to have to stay up to date with all the other findings. It's still going to have to watch the episodes as we go through in order to link back their findings, right? Because, it's all about context, but the primary focus is really the extracurricular material. The task is vast and significant here, guys. So if you think you have the patience and the will, and you like dog style, then this is the task force for you. Welcome to the Anti Strangling Task Force.